Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is part 6, 7 from the census series. We're going to do a little bit more of a theoretical approach regarding the discoupling of the number of House seats. What this means is very simple. 1911 Apportionment Act limits the number of congressional seats in the House to 435. So let's take this limit off the table and artificially inflate the number. What happens? The first rule that is created is colloquially called the Wyoming rule, but it is actually the least populous rule. And what it means is you take each individual territory and you divide it by the population of the lowest populous state. So in the case of Alabama, you have about 5 million people, you divide it by 570,000. So we see that here. And if we then up the decimals, you'll find it's actually 8.7 times. Doesn't matter, we're going to round it up, because that's how it's done. That's how it was done prior to 1911. You just, if it is above a half, so it's 4.6, you got an extra seat. You're lucky. If it's 4.4, then too bad. Better luck next time. That's how Congress worked prior to 1911. So what happens here? So this is the number of House seats in row F that currently is available. This would be the number of House seats that is gained without discounting illegal immigrants. This would be with the 3 illegal immigration models that we've discussed in previous parts of the series. And this would be the relative change. So we can see that in the case of California, they would gain 17 congressional seats by this rule set. Now, does this change much in the end? I'll show you later. A little spoiler warning, but doesn't really do anything. What is funny in this particular card is that, of course, this one is a lower number, and there isn't really a uniform change. The only one here is, for an example, Florida. So it's 37. If you take statistics data, it remains 37. If it becomes Pew, it becomes 36 seats. And with fair, it becomes 35. California, 69 for standard scenario, and then it becomes 65 for most illegal immigrant cases, but in the case of fair, it becomes 63. Here's a little calculation, and this is something I always tend to do when I'm changing around the number of seats, and it is how many congressmen are there per, how many citizens per congressman. So it's in inverse of the parameter that I hooked up with initially. So what happens here is the number becomes significantly lower. So instead of 700,000, it becomes on average in the ballpark of about 500, maybe 600,000. So that is already a gain. And you can already see this in the chart. So for an example, if Delaware is nearing 1 million, and then it halves because they gain an extra seat. Same goes for South Dakota, halves because they gain an extra seat. And he states that this is North Dakota, they don't get a seat. Maine doesn't get one. Vermont doesn't get one. Wyoming doesn't get one, that's obvious. Of course, because they are the least populous state. So Montana, they don't get one either. We already had Maine. Pretty much every other state gets at least one seat. So there's only a limited number of states that have one seat. So we can already go for this, and I made a nice little overview chart for this. So with the Wyoming rule, you'll find that there are 9 states who don't get a seat. Alaska, Maine, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Wyoming. Every other state gets at least one. So for an example, California gets 17, but in other scenarios they get 13 seats and 11 at the lowest. So what happens? Instead of the standard 538, with the Wyoming rule we move to 663. That is electoral votes. So we subtract the Senate votes from it, and we subtract DC, and it becomes 560 congressmen instead of 435. In the case of discounting illegal immigration, 667 shouldn't be higher. Maybe I made a little mathematical error somewhere in this particular ballpark. I don't know why. I don't know why it's appearing like this. Should have double checked the data. In any sense, there's at least 100 seats added to the list. And what happens in the balance of power in this particular case doesn't change much. Some states, it's mostly Republican states that receive additional seats, and Democrat-leaning states don't. So we see, for an example, in this case, in this particular case you have Texas and Florida gaining about the same number of seats as New York and California combined. So at that particular point, it's about break even. Then we find on the top of the list here, so you have Pennsylvania, Ohio, even out. Illinois, Georgia, evens out. Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Virginia, so that's a little gain on the Democrat side. And then you get mostly Republican states gaining seats. So, on average, it's about 5 to 10 Republican electoral votes as an easy gain. So what happens here? We have a floor, we have a likely, and we have leans or tilts when it comes to these states. The floor is basically guaranteed states, so it's 20 percentage points. Likely is with less than 10 but more than 5, and tilts would be less than 5 points. And I don't want to do leans in this particular case because it doesn't really matter. With this kind of mathematical equation, I can fix it on a quick note. Doesn't really matter in my opinion, because the point still stands. There's going to be a significant number of House seats increased, at least 100, so it's about 25%. And as a result, you'll also find that the number of congressmen representing individual people, that number also drops by about 25%. So it is a net benefit. It is still more than twice higher than it used to be prior to the Apportionment Act. You need to take that into account. In the 1900s, it was about 200,000, 220,000 people per congressman. Now it's triple with the current system. With the Wyoming rule, it would still be double that of what it used to be. You need to keep that in mind. There's not really much else to say regarding this topic. Not really that much to talk about, because it's a relatively simple concept. Next video is going to be a different way to approach it, and lastly I want to do the fictional scenarios, and that's probably going to be the thing for next week. Thank you kindly for watching for this one, and I'll see you next episode. Cheers.